So, welcome back to Philosophy for Flourishing, the show where we explore principles and practices for living the happiest, most fulfilling life possible. I'm John Hersey, and today I'm joined by Rajshree Agarwal, professor of entrepreneurship and strategy at the University of Maryland, and the director of the Ed Snyder Center for Enterprise and Markets. Professor Agarwal conducts research on the evolution of industries, firms, and careers, which sounds amazing. And she's also going to be talking about designing your life around a central purpose at TOS-Con 2021 here in a few weeks in Newton, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. Thanks so much for joining me, Rajshree.
Thanks, John, for having me on your show.
So it would be great if you could share a bit about your background as it relates to finding purpose in life, and give us a bit of a tell us how did you get interested in this topic of purpose, and what's your background in helping people to sort of home in on it?
Sure. So because we're going to be talking about purpose, let me first start off with what my own personal purpose is. So, over the years, I have done a lot of course, discovery and creation of who I am based on what I was and also what I want to be. And in fact, I like to think about life as a journey rather than a destination. And I'll come back to that as it relates to personal purpose. But so, what is my personal purpose today? I think if I were to define it, it would be I care deeply, I'm passionately interested in upward mobility. Now, I'm using the phrase upward mobility because my background is in economics. And we tend to think about upward mobility first and foremost in the economic realm. But purpose is important because I care about upward mobility not only in the economic realm, but also in the psychological and in the intellectual realms. So you can see why I think about life as a journey. There, the journey is the destination because you're always constantly trying to figure out how can I be better tomorrow than I am today, but then better defined by what standard, defined according to whom. That is what purpose allows you to first and foremost identify for yourself. And then, of course, you can enact the strategies so you can live a fulfilling and flourishing life.
And you got interested in purpose. I mean, we're all interested in purpose, of course, to some extent, because we want to figure out what should I do with my life. And but you took it into a route that actually allows you to talk to people about this and help them. And I'm wondering, how did you get to that spot?
So there are certain defining moments in your life. So let me start because you asked me to reflect back at a point when I was 12 years old. Growing up in a very traditional Indian household where the patriarch, my father, was the one that made all of the rules. And it was his job to take care of us, especially the women in his family. And so when I was 12 years old, he said to me, the right and the responsibility of finding a man for you to marry is mine. Don't you forget that. And of course, this is in the backdrop of knowing that work was not something that I could do, working for a living, because that would be a slap on his face because he couldn't provide for his family then. And at 12 years, I said, of course, because I was daddy's girl, no question. But by the time I reached 18, I realized that if I did what he wanted to do, I would be living a life that he wanted me to live, but I wouldn't be living the life that I wanted. And over the years, I have come to the realization that there are two decisions that anyone should not renege. None of us should renege in our lives, no matter how benevolent and loving and deeply caring the person is to whom you're reneging on those decisions, like my father. And the two decisions are what you choose to work on and whom you marry or choose to have as your lifelong partner. Because every decision is derivative to these two questions. And it was when I made that realization at about 18 to 20 years old that I rebelled. And in fact, I left a very comfortable life. My father was very rich. I gave up an inheritance and I came to the United States with 2 suitcases to my name because I wanted to have the ability to make my own mistakes rather than live a life of rights, but the right was being done by someone else.
That's incredible. And I admire your courage in doing that.
I didn't think of myself as courageous at that time. I thought of myself as rebellious. Notice that even when I was telling you my story, it was that of rebelling, not of mustering courage.
Mhm. So there's these two important questions: who you marry and what you do. How do those relate to purpose? Do they?
Yes, because it begs the question, how are these decisions going to enable me to live the life that I want to live? Which begs the question, what life do I want to live? And so purpose for me is about identifying problems that I want to solve, that I personally find meaningful. And it's about the two parts. John Allison defines purpose as making the world a better place to live by doing something important for you.
Mm-hmm.
Both elements become very important because your world is the places you go, the things that you do, and the people that you meet. When you're making your choices about these three aspects of your life, you need to ask why. Why do I want to hang out at TOS-Con? Why do I want to spend my time talking to John in this podcast? Why do I want to spend my summer at this beautiful, gorgeous lake house? Why do I deeply care about being a professor in strategy and entrepreneurship? The places I go, the things that I do, and the people that I meet. These are my world. And I want to make these choices conscientiously about things that I care about. Because, see, I want to be happy, but happiness is a lot of hard work because happiness is first and foremost about a sense of self-esteem. So remember, we were talking about upward mobility, not just in the economic realm, but intellectually and psychologically, right? Psychologically, it's about getting self-esteem. Intellectually, it's about working hard to get to be the person that you want to be and you're proud of, right? So these are all virtues and values that the term purpose helps you define for yourself. And you do it not because it's some noble thing to do, not because someone told you you should do it, but because it's your life and you own your life. So of course you want to own its purpose.
And you rebelled, so you were motivated to get out. You're motivated by sort of a negative. I mean, that's what rebellion is in a sense, right? It's, well, I don't want this. And so how did you turn that into, I do want this in my life?
So at the time when I was deeply, deeply guilt ridden, I should say. Why guilt ridden? Because I felt when I was 17 years old that if I did the things that I wanted to do, I was disappointing my father. But if I did the things that my father wanted me to do, that was disappointing myself. So I could do no right. So at that point in time, not only was I very guilt ridden, but as is true, I realized for most adults or young adults that are at the cusp of becoming their own person, which is exactly this age between this very tender but very important age between, let's say, 16, 17 to 23, 24, right? Most of us question what is it that we want. We challenge our parents because our parents have been our safety net, but they've also been our decision makers, right? So we want to rebel against them, but we also need them to be there for us to make sure that we can do wrong, right? And I find this relationship to be very true with my own two daughters now, who are 24 and 22 respectively. But during that time of deep angst that all of us go through, because we're being an adult is not just about being financially responsible. It's also about being responsible for your own actions. I felt completely paralyzed, and that caused me a huge amount of depression too. During that time was when I discovered Atlas Shrugged. And reading Atlas Shrugged, more so than Fountainhead, I realized that the right and the responsibility of what I wanted to do with my life was mine, not my father's, and I needed to own that. And at the same time, the positive beacon was the United States, because it was a land that focused on individualism, the American dream. What is the American dream? It is not about riches. It is about riches, yes, but it's not just about riches. It's really about independence. It's about resilience. It's about ownership of yourself. It's about responsibility. So a lot of the things that growing up in that culture where the dictate was, what will people say? Am I disappointing my elders? Right? Those aren't the first and foremost questions that I ask my own daughters to think about today. Of course, they care about what I should say because I'm their parent, but not as the overriding and principal concern in their lives, but more because I am their well-wisher consultant rather than the decision maker. So it was the negative of what I didn't have, but the positive of what I could be that really inspired me to leave, to come to the United States. And by the way, people say, oh, I'm so learned because I'm an endowed professor. Let me give you a secret. Education was my escape hatch. I was the tomboy that wanted to have fun, rode motorcycles, even in India, where the whole road cleared because this woman was riding a motorcycle. And oh my gosh, they were just, she was just going to ram into you. So you better get out of her way. So I had a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, right? During those rebellious periods too. But studying for me was not something that I wanted to, like, I want a PhD and I want to get to be a professor. It was, no, I need to come to the United States. The best way I could do that is leverage what I did have, and that was my own intellectual ability. And so that was my ticket out of India into the United States. And I got an assistantship, got a PhD in economics, and then became the professor that I am today.
And so you did it as an escape hatch to get away from something. But in time, it became your life's purpose and you really grew to love it. Is that right?
Yes, of course.
And you studied economics and then you got into entrepreneurship. And obviously, economics is really important to understand if you want to teach entrepreneurship. How does that relate? How does entrepreneurship relate to finding purpose in life, or does it?
Yes, it does. In fact, thank you for asking that question. That's actually very astute of you. So let me build out that aspect too. So I became interested in economics because I care deeply about social systems and social and political systems that would allow individuals to thrive. Uh, and I realized that the difference between the India that I grew up in versus the United States, which was my chosen home, and especially this is pre-liberalization, pre-1990s India, where it was very much under the 5-year plans of, the Russian philosophy of creating 5-year government plans. The government was very much in the economy. So I could see the contrast. And I had recognized very early on that innovation and entrepreneurship were the twin engines that allowed economic systems to flourish, and so the individuals within economic systems to flourish too. So there are both causes and consequences of innovation and entrepreneurship. But over time, I have realized that the engines of innovation and entrepreneurship really relate to what I call human enterprise. It relates not only to our abilities and our actions towards being innovative, being entrepreneurial. But if you think about the term enterprise, it is a business enterprise or an economic activity, but it's also a mindset, the willingness to engage in daring and difficult action. And of course, the two are very related to each other. So human enterprise is not just about my current capabilities, but it's also about my aspirations. It's about my motivations. It's about a growth mindset. And so, as you noticed, I focused as an economist first on what makes economies and industries and firms thrive. But now I focus on individual careers because at the root, at the fountainhead of firms and economies are people, are individuals. And they are the ones that have to invest their entrepreneurial energy, not only to be what they want to be, but also in solving problems that they find meaningful, which gets us back to purpose.
It's funny that you go there with the individuals. You know, I've thought about this before, and you can learn a lot about economics by studying economics. You can learn a lot about business by reading business books. But I've always learned the most about these things by reading biographies of people that are really great in one of these fields. And, you know, it's just, you really tap into that. So I'm glad that you do this at the individual level. You're really looking at, okay, what does this person's career look like? How did they get from point A to point B?
And John, this also, in fact, relates to how I talk about enterprise and markets. Now, notice that the Ed Snyder Center is called the Ed Snyder Center for Enterprise and Markets. It could have been called the Ed Snyder Center for Capitalism Studies. In fact, Ed Snyder, who was the donor, um, wanted the center to be called the Center for Capitalism Studies. But here is a very important story that brings the individual back in. So my very first meeting with Ed Snyder was a kind of a meeting that was going to either seal the deal for him to give the gift, or he was going to say, not working. I don't trust the director. So no pressure, right?
You're right.
And so I meet with him, and it's magic, John. I mean, the two of us mind melded. We were like kindred spirits. And so for the first half hour to 45 minutes, things were just awesome. And then he said, great, let's do this. Have you decided on what the name of the center is going to be? And his son, who was the executive director of the Snyder Foundation, said, yes, it's going to be the Ed Snyder Center for Capitalism Studies. And he looked at me and he said, what do you think? Now, I knew that he had insisted that the word capitalism be in there. So I looked at him and I said, do you really want to know? And he says, yes, I do. I said, I don't like it. What do you mean you don't like it? I said, here is the challenge. If the center is named the Center for Capitalism Studies, we're focusing on the economy. Mm-hmm. We're focusing on institutions. What I want to do, and then of course, capitalism itself is a dirty name today because it's misunderstood. Mm-hmm. It's not that I am not a capitalist in terms of the notion of what capitalism stands for, which is enterprise and market. So the two twin engines that make capitalist institutions thrive is individual freedom and freedom to trade. So those are the enterprise and markets element. So I said, I'd rather channel the positive than confront the negative. So we argued, by the way. He did not give in very easily. But here is why I say that the individual is so important. So not only was the name important for me because it channeled individual enterprise, which is then collaboratively in trade within organizations, creating collaborative enterprises, productive enterprises, but then these enterprises trade with each other in markets too. So you notice that the focus is on the individual building up to institutions. But more importantly, what I realized is that to get to people to understand the value of capitalism, you have to start with the individual. Because when I'm having a conversation with you, John, about what's your purpose? What do you want to do in your life that makes you feel like you're personally fulfilled, that you're financially secure, that you're establishing your wellness goals, that you have meaningful relationships in your life, that you're part of a chosen community, that you get to choose rather than it being thrust to you, that you get to interact with nature the way you want to so that it brings you peace. These are the 6 pillars, by the way, of our intentional life lab in the Ed Snyder Center for Enterprise and Markets. But notice it's very individual focused, but then it leads up to the community. When you focus on the individual and then think about how individuals can create win-win relationships with each other, you also reframe conversations about social interactions so that it's not, John, that I'm the perpetrator and you're the victim, or somebody else needs to come in and save you from me. It is that you and I are independent equals coming together and collaborating because it's mutually beneficial for each other. And that's what capitalism allows you to do. So notice the focus is still on the economy, but it starts at the individual level.
Yeah, and this coheres perfectly with the way that I think about how to talk about capitalism. And, capitalism is still to some extent considered a dirty word. But people tend to think, okay, well, the interests of businessmen and their customers are at odds. They're always inherently in conflict. Whatever it is that the business wants, it's not what these individuals want. But then when we think about our own lives, when we just think about, it actually doesn't work out when I harm other people and when I'm not good to other people. It doesn't work out for me in the long run. And it's the same at the level of businesses. Businesses are no different. They win when their customers win, but we can see this more easily when we look at the individual level. And if you look at, just somebody running a lemonade stand or something very basic, it's just common sense, but yet we tend to gravitate toward these examples of, Bernie Madoffs, Martin Shkreli's, and people like this who give this moral impetus behind capitalism a really bad rap, when in fact most of them are, they're really not capitalists in the sense that you and I mean, and they're not out there trying to create value for people in the world.
So 2 reactions to what you said, John. Of course, I completely agree, but if I may build out on 2 components of it. The first one relates to this view of capitalism as cutthroat, as win-lose that you were talking about. And whether it is between customers and firms, between managers and employees, whether it is with other broader stakeholders that you might define, the framing of a win-lose relationship is focusing on competition. But capitalism is not first and foremost about competition. Markets are first and foremost about collaboration, about creating platforms. So if you think about trade, why are we trading? Because something that I have is of greater value to you, and something that you have is of greater value to me. Right? And we both benefit from this trade. That's why we specialize, right? I'm a professor. My husband likes to have boats, right? But I don't need to know how to make boats. So my husband doesn't need to how to make boats. We just need to make the living that we're doing the best we can, and then we can purchase boats, right? So first and foremost, markets are about trade. And those that collaborate exceptionally well with their customers, with their employees, with their financial stakeholders, with their external stakeholders, however you want to define it, who create better winning solutions through collaborations, win at the expense of those that aren't able to collaborate as well. So it's a secondary consequence. It's not the first and foremost reason for us to live. You don't get up, John, nor do I, nor do most people that we encounter get up saying, how am I going to take advantage of this person? Right? And in fact, I would say that a person that gets up, the Bernie Madoffs of the world, they have not actually stopped to define their purpose holistically. And indeed, they're not living lives firsthand. This gets back to Fountainhead. They're living lives secondhand. They want status in other people's eyes, prestige in other people's eyes. But if they look in the mirror, they know that they lack integrity, that they lack honesty, and their prestige and their status is only a function of how well they can convince others that they're not who they are. I wouldn't want to be in that skin, would you?
Absolutely not.
That's not what living a life with purpose is about. That's not living a life of self-esteem is about. And in the short run, it may work. In the long run, it always comes back to haunt you.
And coming back to purpose, you're going to talk about purpose and finding purpose at TOS-Con. Could you give us a sneak peek of the method that you're going to talk about there?
I've been doing this all along, actually.
Excellent.
So nothing that I have said. So I'm going to elaborate on all of the things that I have said and more. But what I hope to do at TOS-Con is provide you concepts and frameworks that help you piece it all down. So at the end of the day, I'm going to be talking about 4 questions that each and every one of us should be asking as CEO of Me Incorporated, my enterprise incorporated, going back to that individual focus and human enterprise as a focus. So what I intend to do there is talk about what 4 questions should you be asking. The first one, of course, is what is my purpose? The second, what does success look like for me? The third, what's my value proposition? And fourth, with whom should I trade? We've been talking about all of this. What I hope to do is give you the answers or give you frameworks that will allow you to figure out the answers for yourself and be intentional about the life that you lead.
Can we dig into one of these now?
Well, we've been digging into purpose all along. We've also dug into the with whom should I trade?
That's the part that I was asking, yeah.
Yes. And of course, that's the one thing, right? Most people often say, well, I get the first 3, but with whom do I trade? I don't understand. But we're going to talk about how the first 3 questions actually lead to the 4th question itself, and how trade relationships at the end of the day have to be win-win. Or else, if it's a win-lose, one of us is going to walk away, and then it's going to end up being a lose-lose.
Excellent. So I'm so excited to hear more at TOS-Con 2021. That's July 21st through 24th at the Boston Marriott Newton, and designing your life around a central purpose. This is going to be, I think, a highlight for me of the conference. This is something that I'm always thinking about. In fact, I just wrote a piece about purpose recently at the Objective Standard called The Book That Helped Me Find Purpose in Life. And I think you can guess what book that was. So where can people keep up with your work?
I write Forbes op-eds. So the easiest way to do it is to look at some of my Forbes op-eds. Rajshree has a media page. You can go down there and you can take a look at all of my op-eds. I tend to build a lot off of the research that I do and bring it home to why this should matter. Why this should matter for you when you want to lead purposeful lives individually, and how this should frame our view of businesses and society, of government and government intervention. When is it appropriate? When is it not appropriate? An example is some of my most recent research, which is on mobile money. It is a platform that has alleviated poverty. 2.3 billion people unbanked in 1995. Mobile money has given them financial access, so that now, circa 2014, 2015, there were at least 1.4 billion mobile money accounts that were created. That didn't just happen. Of course, it's a grand challenge that was issued by the UN as a millennium, but governments didn't solve the problem. Private enterprises, startups solve the problem. And they did so, one of my Forbes op-eds talks about it, by being enterprising in their own world to change the world out there. So, research that I do spins into why this should matter for social problems just like that. My other Forbes op-ed that you'd be very interested in is perhaps the meaning of work for a happy life. And of course, in parentheses is New Year too, because that was one of my New Year resolution type of articles.
Nice.
And so there I talk about profit and purpose and why the two need to be together, not one or the other.
Profit and purpose need to be together. That's a great way to put it. So thank you so much. You're such an inspiration. We'll put links to all of that stuff in the show notes. And again, I look forward to seeing your talk. I hope you guys that are listening will join us at TOS-Con 2021. Again, link in the show notes for registration for that. If you're enjoying the podcast, I hope you'll subscribe and give us a rating. It's small, but it does go a long way. And until next time, happy flourishing.